Hi, I'm Chris Cozen. I'm happy to be back here today to explore various kinds of surfaces you can work on in acrylic. You'll learn all the options you have and go beyond the unexpected to understand how both paints and products respond to each of the surfaces. We'll explore how to choose a surface to work on. What are the inexpensive options available to you? Whether you should prep or not, let somebody else do it for you. And how to work on old, raw, or unusual surfaces. Now we're going to take some water after we do this and see what happens when we add water to it, because the paper now has its absorbent surface revealed and we want to take advantage of that. So by adding the water to my surface, I can actually erase. If you take a good look at that, you see that I can erase as much or as little of that stencil pattern as I want. So I can take some out. And you also notice that the paint is being pulled down into the surface. I got a little red paint on there. It's being pulled down into the surface very differently than it might have if I'd used the water technique on the gesso. The gesso sealed the surface. So I can bring water into this. And we'll do a little experiment here and try to move, try to move some of this like we did before, and it just isn't quite the same as it was on the gesso surface. If you look, I'm trying to move it when it's just not moving the same way as it did on the gesso surface. A little bit on the freshest part, but we were able to move it on the gessoed surface without any problem. So you can continue, now that you've added the water, by putting in additional stencils, but you'll still have the pattern and then have to remove the pattern just by adding water on the ungessoed surface. So let's put in more pattern in. You can see how you can keep building. I often start a piece by doing a heavily patterned surface and then eventually reveal or block as much of it or as little of it as I end up wanting as I move on. So it's a good way to start, and I'll cover a lot more of that in a future video about how to start paintings. I'm going to wet the surface in some areas, just with plain water and a brush, and not everywhere. And I'll show you why once you see how the paint responds to it. I'm going to pick up first a little high flow phthalo blue and drop it into that section. And it is so beautiful to watch it, much less play with it. It would be, there's an old adage about watching how boring it is to watch paint dry. Well, not in this case. It's really kind of fascinating to watch the momentum of how the paint floats out into the surface and how the surface just seems to take over. Don't be scared of that, though, because some of the most wonderful things can happen when the surface does its own thing. It's great to explore unusual surfaces for that reason, because you just can have fascinating outcomes without any great extended effort on your part, just to see what happens. Playing is a really good thing when it comes to painting. So I've added some Hansa Yellow high flow into this phthalo blue, and you can start to see how the pigment pushes the first pigment away. And it's creating this little serrated border where the pigments are talking to each other. Now, not all paint does this. High flow in particular does this process. I'm not sure of the mechanics. All I know is that the outcomes are fascinating, and I have been loving the ability to explore them. And just watch it. It's great. Can you see it? Oh, right there. I regularly cut stamps. A friend of mine actually cut this one a long time ago. You see her frog on the back, but a spiral is always fun. This is a bird I cut, which is actually the bird that's in this piece. And here's a face, and we're going to use the face this time. And my preferred printing ink these days is open black, carbon black open paint. And I just put a little bit on the on a plate here, and I'm going to smear some over the top with my palette knife and make sure I cover all the image. And I'm going to test this image. I put plenty on here and then test it before I re-ink it to be sure I have it properly cut. This is a soft cut carving block, and it's very easy. So that's a good image. It'll work. So that was the proper amount. Let's redo it. And on the vinyl, open paint's going to take some time to dry. So I've prepped one already, but we're going to show you how to stamp it. I'm going to stamp 2 images because I'll be able to get 2 without any problem. Take a little square of this. Let's put it back on the paper so you can see it a little easier out the wood showing through. And then position this in the center. Or it doesn't have to be the center. We could do stacked. Let's do stacked. One this way. You don't want to rock it because it'll smear. See, it smeared. Nice thing about this paint, it's always good to make mistakes in public. So we can just wipe it out. Lose nothing. The open paint with its slow dry time gives us a lot more flexibility. Let's try that one more time and don't push so hard. Not hard enough. We'll dry it down here. Try it one more time. There we go. We did this one. Never be afraid to make mistakes, because we learn a lot about ourselves and about products by making mistakes. And sometimes the mistakes lead us to better discoveries. So in this example, I'm going to do a textured stencil, carrying through with the stencil theme. I'm going to apply a textured stencil into this white space over here, overlapping the circle. And it's going to be heavy body titanium white, which when it dries will be a matte finish. I'm going to tape it down so we don't have any slipping and sliding. Ordinarily, I don't tape it down, but because I'm working on a surface that has a certain amount of give, taping it down is just for security's sake, so I don't slide. And although we've done this technique in other videos in the past, it bears repeating in this kind of a situation because it's going to give you a sense of how applications can be layered on for surfaces. So I pick up some on my palette knife, and I'm going to make sure and press down on my stencil and scrape that product through the stencil in a level manner. I don't want it to be sponged on because I want the edges to be raised when I'm done. Have to have enough product to be able to get it through all the holes. And hopefully I did it. I see a little bit over here. Do I have enough? Yeah. Got to get a little bit more so I get it on the edge of my, just a tiny bit more. Almost made it. Right there. Okay. So, and you don't let it dry here. You want to pick it up so that you have the raised stencil. I have a little bit of flow underneath here. That's where the most give was. But you can still see that it gives, especially right there where it's thick on the edge, is a raised part. So we could continue to repeat this in this case I wouldn't repeat the whole stencil. This time we'll sponge it on, so we have the difference between the two. It's heavy body being sponged instead of fluid, so it's going to have a slight texture rather than a mild texture like the fluids would provide. This will have a little bit more of a pebbly surface. Okay, so now we'll have both the more level one and the raised one.